You know, every great chess player knows how to attack, but only the true masters know how to finish. In chess, the endgame isn't really the end. It's where legends are made, and it's where games are won. Today, we are cracking open the timeless lessons from the one book that has pretty much defined how champions master this final phase of the game. Reuben Fine's masterpiece, Basic Chess Endings.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This quote from the legendary coach Bruce Pandolfini, well, it says it all. For decades, this has been the book, the absolute go-to guide for anyone who's serious about converting an advantage or, saving a seemingly lost position. So, let's find out what makes it so essential.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this, just like a master would. We're going to build our knowledge from the ground up. First, we'll start with the absolute bedrock, kings and pawns. Then we'll bring in the specialists, the minor pieces. After that, it's time for the heavyweights, the rooks and queens. And finally, we'll uncover the universal laws that really govern all endings.
All right, welcome to what I like to call the soul of chess. When it's just kings and pawns on the board, there's just nowhere to hide. It's all about pure, cold, hard calculation. You master this, and you've built the foundation for absolutely everything else that follows.
Okay, this first idea requires a complete mental shift. Through the entire opening and middle game, your king is this vulnerable target you have to protect at all costs, right? Well, in the endgame, you throw that thinking right out the window. The king basically takes off its royal robes, rolls up its sleeves, and becomes one of the most powerful fighting pieces you have.
So how does this fighting king actually use its power? Well, it's all about a critical concept called opposition. The best way to think of it is like a face-off, a standoff. When the kings are staring each other down and there's an odd number of squares between them, the player whose turn it isn't to move has the advantage. They get to force the other king to step aside, letting their own king march forward and take control of key squares.
And what about those pawns sprinting towards the other side of the board to become a queen? Well, you don't need to count every single move to see if the enemy king can catch one. Instead, you can use this simple, brilliant geometric tool, the rule of the square. First, just picture a square that goes from the pawn all the way to its promotion rank. Now, if the enemy king can step inside that square on its next turn, yeah, the pawn is caught. But if it can't, well, congratulations, you're getting a new queen.
Okay, so we've got our foundation built. Now let's start adding in the minor pieces. See, each one of them, the bishop and the knight, they have their own distinct personality. And understanding their unique strengths and weaknesses, that's the key to dominating these kinds of endgames. And this really shows you just how different they are. The bishop, think of it as your long-range sniper. It just slices across an open board, controlling huge diagonals from far away. The knight, on the other hand, is like your special ops agent. It's a short-range skirmisher that's amazing in cluttered, closed positions where it can hop over stuff and hit weak points. The pawn structure on the board is usually what decides which one is better.
But here's the thing. A bishop's power isn't a given. It can actually become a huge liability if it turns into a bad bishop. This happens when your own pawns get stuck on the same color squares as your bishop. They basically build a prison for their own piece. As you can see, its mobility just gets crippled, it becomes a target, and a good mobile knight can just run circles around it.
All right, it's time to bring out the big guns. Major piece endings, the ones with rooks and queens, are by far the most common in chess. They're complex, they're dynamic, and you absolutely have to master them if you want to start winning games consistently.
And within this category, one piece really stands above all the rest. Reuben Fine makes it incredibly clear. Rook endings are the absolute cornerstone of endgame theory. More games are decided in a rook and pawn endgame than pretty much any other kind. Bottom line, if you want to master the endgame, you have to master the rook.
And to master rook endings, you've got to know these two legendary positions. Think of them as two sides of the same coin. On the left, you've got the Lucena position. This is the blueprint for winning when you're a pawn up. The key idea is called building a bridge with your rook to shield your king, letting it safely escort that pawn home. Then on the right, you have the Philidor position. This is the ultimate defensive technique for drawing when you're a pawn down. Here, the goal is to use your rook on the third rank to cut off the enemy king, stopping it from helping its pawn.
Okay, so now that we've looked at the individual pieces, let's zoom out a bit. Fine points out that there are these universal strategic principles that apply to all endgames, no matter which pieces are actually on the board. These are like the golden rules for the final phase of the game.
And here they are, the 4 pillars. We've already talked about king activity. Get your king into the fight. Initiative means you're the one asking the questions, making your opponent react to you.
A fortress is a brilliant defensive setup where you can get a draw even if you're down material. And then there's the most subtle and deadliest weapon of all, Zugzwang.
Zugzwang. It's a German word, and it basically means a compulsion to move. It's that horrible, sinking feeling when it's your turn, but you would do anything for it not to be. Every single legal move you have just makes your position worse, but you have to move. That's the rules. Getting your opponent into a position of Zugzwang is, well, it's the ultimate sign of endgame domination.
So this all brings us to this central question of endgame play, a question Fine makes us think about over and over. What do you value more? An extra pawn? That's a clear material advantage, right? But an active king controlling the center of the board? That's a huge positional advantage. The answer, of course, is that it always depends. And understanding that trade-off, that's what separates the good players from the truly great ones.
At the end of the day, what Reuben Fine really teaches us is that the endgame is a science. It's not about hoping for a lucky break. It's about the precise application of fundamental principles. If you study these lessons, if you really internalize these positions, you'll start to see the chessboard in a completely new way. You'll transform your game from the end backwards. If this explainer helped you sharpen your endgame understanding, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the art of chess mastery.